All right, as we are all getting in, hi everyone, my name is Samantha Friesen. I'm a student leader here at the Center for Service in Action. We're so excited to have you here in these workshops, keynote. Um, if you're interested in closed captioning, that option should be available just on the very bottom. All you have to do is click the live transcript button and it should pop up with some subtitles for you. And just a note about that, it is automated, so sometimes it's going to be maybe not the most accurate, but it does a pretty good job. And so the Center for Service in Action is so pleased to welcome Dawn and Andrea to our 19th annual Social Justice Conference. And Dawn and Andrea are co-founders of the Women's March, and today they're just going to talk a little bit about activism and politics and how they intersect, as well as ways to power up democracy with some specific cases from SLO County and beyond. So please welcome me in joining Dawn and Andrea.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm so excited that the Center for Service in Action organizes this conference. It is so phenomenal. I hope you all saw the morning keynote speaker. She was fantastic, and we are so excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Samantha.
Anyways, when this is plugged into your monitor.
Our workshop today is going to be about politics and activism and how they intersect and why it is important to be involved in all of them. So what can you expect in the next hours? First, we will do a quick round of introductions. Next, we will talk about the spark. What is it that sets your soul on fire? What is it that makes you want to create change in the world? Then we will talk about how activism and politics intersect, and we will share some specific examples with you from our experience. Afterwards, we will give you some tips and tools so you're ready not just to forge ahead, but keep the momentum going. So as Sam mentioned, my name is Andrea Chmelik. I am a writer, speaker, and activist. As you can tell from the picture, I am taller than most. I'm an immigrant, feminist, chocolate addict, and my husband once called me people elitist, and he is not wrong. I work as a social media strategist and communication professional, and I live in Pismo Beach with 2 kids and 2 pets, and there is a good chance that during this hour you will hear one or the other, in which case I apologize ahead of time.
No, I don't believe so. She already was talking about, I think, canceling the.
And I'm Dawn Addis, and welcome everyone. And as we're saying hello and introducing ourselves, we'd love to see and hear about you in the chat. So if you want to, as I'm going through mine, let us know your name and what social justice issue you're interested in. That'll kind of help us craft our time today. But I wear 3 different hats, really, in addition to being a mom and a wife and a friend here on the Central Coast. I am first and foremost a public educator from San Luis Coastal Unified School District, and I work with English learner and immigrant communities, and that's one of the things that led me to this work. I'm also a community organizer and activist with Women's March San Luis Obispo, one of the founding members back in 2017, and that's really what brought Andrea and many of my close friendships today together came out of Women's March in 2017. And then the other hat I wear is as a local city council member and former candidate for state assembly. And so one of the things that Andrea and I have really thought about over the past few years is how do we weave these 2 things together? Activism, meeting politics, and being able to create the change that we all want to see from both ends. So we're very excited, and again, would love to hear about what you're interested in, who you are in the chat, and we can, hopefully share some stories related to that. And we're lucky to have Samantha Friesen from Cal Poly who's supporting us today. And so Sam, if there's anything in the chat, we'd love to hear who's in the room with us today.
Yeah, so it looks like Sarah is with access to equitable health care, and Laura with racial justice and protecting access to voting, and Ashley said, or Ashley, if you'd like to speak up, you're welcome to. Or Dawn, if you want to read that specifically. It just looks like it's a little bit longer, but I can also read it.
Oh, I'm happy to read it. I'll read it out loud. So Ashley did some research for my campaign, my assembly campaign. So thank you so much, Ashley. And I'm so glad you're here today. And she is interested in gender and power-based violence and discrimination, and hoping to hear more about some of our experiences. So thank you so much, Ashley, for being here and joining us.
And then Bill also just chimed in with political issues, racism, immigrant rights, and voting rights.
Thank you for sharing, everybody. You can continue putting things in the chat. I actually recommend that at the end of this event, you save the chat because it's really interesting to refer back to it for later when you need inspiration.
So we wanted to start with talking about the spark, because everybody needs a spark when they get into activism, but you definitely need to keep that spark if you're going to go into politics or interface at all with the political system. You have to remember why you're doing what you're doing. And so for me, I'm going to tell a little bit about my spark, and then Andrea is going to talk about her spark. And then we'd love to hear about your spark in the chat. But for me, back in 2017, as I mentioned earlier, that I work with immigrant families and English learners. I've taught students with special needs for many, many years, and have always been a strong advocate for women. And so the lead up to the 2017 election was particularly devastating for me, listening to so many of the people that I work with really become the scapegoats for all of America's issues, and the violent and really horrific rhetoric that was being used. And so I wanted to do something for the 2017 election. I thought maybe I should go to Washington, D.C. for the Women's March, and decided, you know what, we need something right here in San Luis Obispo, because all of what we see at the national level occurs right here at home. We've seen that over the past few years with Black Lives Movement and people speaking up, and we really had to uncover that. So I set out to have a Women's March here, and thought maybe I would get a couple hundred people. I know Jen Ford is out there in the audience and some other folks from Women's March. So I want to give her a shout out because she jumped on board right away and we started planning together. And that's how I met Andrea. But we thought, you know, maybe this will resonate with 200 or 300 people. And it turned out to resonate with 10,000 people at that time. So my spark has always been looking out at this crowd of people and remembering how much power we have and how much hope there is when we come together to work for a common goal.
So I can see in the chat Ashley saying personal experience and the presidential election were definitely her spark, and it was the same for me. My spark that moved me from being a spectator to being a player was the 2016 presidential election. I was born and raised in Czechoslovakia, a country that no longer exists. And back then it was a communist authoritarian country. There was only one party to vote for. Ballots were pre-printed with the names of candidates that were chosen to win, and people who did not turn out to vote were blacklisted and punished along with their families. So everyone voted. The voter turnout was actually 99.5%. But for over 4 decades, nobody could truly speak their truth. And I came to the United States when I was 22 years old. I made new friends, I built new relationships, I set down roots. But as an immigrant, I constantly questioned if my voice here mattered, because I was often reminded that I just don't understand things because I didn't grow up here. And, you know, my opinion on issues is not as important because I'm an outsider. And then the 2016 election was actually the very first one that I was eligible to vote in as a new American citizen. And to me, the results of that election were crushing. But the one thing that happened was that at that moment, I knew that the time to question whether my voice matters or can make a difference is over. It was time to make sure that I can use my voice and make sure that everybody else who feels the same way will also be heard. So the next thing I heard about the Women's March and decided that I have to be a part of it. And of course, as anyone my age at least does, I hopped on Facebook and connected with women who were already started planning a local march, which was Dawn Addis and Jen Ford, who's here as well. So that was the beginning for me. Sam, did you want to read anything from the chat? Any sparks?
Sorry,
It's so exciting to see all of these in the chat, Sam. Yeah, we'd love to hear 2 or 3 of them.
Yes, sorry, I was just letting some people in and not quite looking at the chat currently. Let's see. It looks like some things that were recently said are climate justice and environmental issues, environmental concerns. Oh, it switched. Environmental concerns, water pollution, working for a cooperative world. Hannah with University Housing at Polity is interested in educating students about privilege and accessibility for white women and our part complacency and upholding the isms in our society. And Sarah shared her spark was facing bankruptcy for being pregnant and giving birth to her daughter because the pregnancy was noted as a pre-existing condition before the Affordable Care Act.
And it's so amazing to me to hear all of what sparks people, because we start with that conversation as activists and asking for change from the outside. And when we talk about this intersection between activism and politics, getting into politics, whether it's, you know, just coming to make public comment or getting on a board or commission or running for office yourself, it's about making change from the inside out. So we're going to transition to that section of our presentation, but we wanted to share this photo with you because it was the perfect example of how we started Women's March, and we started with the campaign of Hear Our Voice, turned it into the campaign of Hear Our Vote, but we're able to make connections with our congressional representatives so that we could have a voice in terms of making policy and making true change. And so we wanted to share these definitions with you of activism and politics. And it's so interesting that activism starts out with the policy of using vigorous campaigning to bring about social change and political change. And so much of what you do as an activism can lead into many of the activities that are needed if you decide to be in politics at any level, whether it's a board or commission or in office or showing up to meetings. And then politics being the activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals. And it was wonderful to see in the chat how many of you are thinking about such important issues that we need to bring into this political realm. We cannot continue to only ask for change from the outside. And so one example of this is at the federal level. This is Cori Bush, and she is a congresswoman. She was just elected in 2020. She was elected after her 3rd time running. She first ran for senator, then she ran for House representative. And this is an excerpt from her speech. She said, "For years, we've lived under leadership that shut us out of our own government. But tonight, we, the people, are victorious because the people have committed to a vision of America that treats every person with respect. It is my job now to serve you, not just to lead, not just demand, but serve you. And this moment is brought to us by our movement for social, racial, and economic justice. And I just love that so many of you put these issues in the chat. And Cori Bush started out protesting and got herself into the halls of Congress. And it's just, she's such a perfect example of the hard work, but also the change that can happen when we take our activist selves to being in office.
Yes, Cori Bush.
And so on, oh,
yeah, I will take
go ahead.
Cori Bush is an example of how your life experience informs your activism, and then your activism informs the policies that you advocate for. You do not have to run for office to bring along the change that matters to you, although you certainly can. But it is helpful to understand the dynamic between advocacy in activism and advocacy in politics. And so this slide, this is like the one where I expect everyone's eyes just glaze over, but we have some specific examples that will make this interesting, I promise. So let's go back to the beginning. Picture this. It is 2016. I am a stay-at-home mom. My kids are 3 and 6 years old. I pay attention to politics and I pay attention to social justice issues. You know, I remind people to vote. I share articles on social media. But I also have 4 baskets of laundry at any given time. I can't really go anywhere because bedtime is at 7 p.m. And my social life as a mother is non-existent. This was before pandemic. I didn't know it could get worse, but here we are. And then boom, right? Election day, the spark. And so, Dawn, if you can flip back to that previous slide, just so we get to see the steps. So I connect with Dawn and the other organizers of Women's March Slow, and we decide to bring awareness to the issues of women's rights and equity. It's not a single issue because women live multi-issue lives. You know, it's domestic violence and reproductive rights, yes, but it's also LGBTQ rights, immigrant rights, workers' rights, civil rights, disability rights, environmental issues. All of that matters in women's lives. So we decided we're going to organize a march and a rally. We built support with people in the community who stand for the same values, but also with local organizations that are aligned with our mission, and with elected officials who share our values. Then we share our message on social media, in press, news, local radios. We contact everyone we can think of that would help us to get the message out. We invite speakers to the rally that amplify the message. Now the message is out there. Then we have the opportunity to invite our Congressman, Salud Carvajal, who now knows about us and knows about our message, to a town hall. But we organize the town hall on our terms. So we choose the topics that we want to talk about. We choose the questions that we want him to address that will relate to women's issues. And then when he goes back to Washington, he knows what his constituents expect from him, and he's better informed about why these issues matter and what they mean to people who live on the Central Coast. So the next few months later, the White House imposes abortion gag rule, which cuts Title X funding to healthcare clinics. These are the clinics that provide family planning services to more than 4 million people every day, the majority of whom are people of color and earn below the poverty level. And we are invited to a roundtable conversation with the congressman, along with Planned Parenthood and GALA and CAPSLO and other local organizations and activists. So that's how you can see how these things connect with each other. Now, it doesn't mean that after the meeting, you know, a solution is immediately pushed through and policy fixes everything right away. And while you are doing this work, you are still focused on bringing awareness, building support, and sharing the message. But now your voice is heard on the policy level as well. You might need to try it multiple times. You know that change takes a long time. It does not happen overnight. We would not be having this conference if change happened overnight. it really helps if you have a long-term vision that you can dedicate time and energy to, and that you always remember your spark, and you always remember why the time and energy that you're putting into is worth it. It will always be worth it. And you will not always be able to dedicate 100% of your attention to your activism. But if you just remember that things take time and you're on the right path, then this will keep you going. And sometimes there are surprising wins. You know, I can tell you that I often walk into the room expecting the worst, right? I think that people are going to fight the message. I can tell you, and this goes back to just we all have certain preconceived notions of I meet a person and I'm convinced that they are going to call me out or argue with me about an issue that I came to talk about. And instead, what I get is, oh, yes, I'm on the same page, or, oh, that's really interesting. How can we make a difference? And sometimes really it doesn't actually take that much effort if you're just willing to ask the question, if you're just willing to start. And Dawn has some examples from her work in politics that she will share with you as well. Oh, I was just going to mention before you go in, Dawn, I'm sorry. Yes, you know, then if you have representatives who you feel fight for you, who represent the values that you stand for as well, then you can help them by getting reelected, by, you know, working or volunteering in their campaign. Or if that is not the case, then you can help somebody who would be a better leader, a better elected officials to get in office.
And I guess my biggest kind of takeaway from all of this was, you know, we had the Women's March in 2017, and what we wanted at the time was just to have our voices heard. And what I quickly realized is having your voice heard isn't enough. It's very easy to say to somebody, well, I hear you. But it's not enough if laws aren't changing, if funding decisions aren't changing, if there isn't real concrete things that are being done. And at the time, going into the 2018 elections, I knew there was about 23% of Congress was women. So I started to take a look at what was going on locally. And we only had 11% women on the primary that year. So I decided at that time, nobody else was stepping up. I needed to step up and run for office. So I ran for city council. And to be honest, I wasn't 100% sure if my voice really was going to be different. You know, a lot of things going on in my town didn't necessarily seem like they were aligned with the Women's March principles of social justice, of economic justice, of racial justice, of immigrants' rights, of workers' rights. We were talking a lot about the sewer plant in my town, and I wasn't really sure, you know, how did that really line up with Women's March? So it took me some time to think deeply about that and to find my place in terms of sharing my message. But something came before us, which is our Coast Guard, located here in Morro Bay, wanted to expand their building. And in exchange for expanding their building, they were going to take up 3 parking spaces. And they were going to give the city some money, some garbage can enclosures, as well as some historical signage. And I found out that our Coast Guard doesn't staff any women at the Coast Guard here in Morro Bay. It's 100% men at our Coast Guard station. And so as we were going through these conversations, I kept thinking, is it enough that the Coast Guard is going to give us garbage can enclosures? Can we not ask the Coast Guard to do something for gender equity and something for gender balance with their hiring? And so we actually wrote into the contract that the Coast Guard would report on their efforts, at the very least would report every year to City Council on their efforts to be able to staff women at that station. And so it's been the very beginning of a conversation where I was able to bring my voice to public office to make the change. And it comes from having that background in activism and working for women's rights and for economic justice for women. And another thing that came before City Council was during the most recent Black Lives Matter movement, when Race Matters SLO County had a campaign going to declare racism a public health crisis. And I can tell you this was not the first time that racism came up in Morro Bay. A few years earlier, we had somebody come forward to say that they had been called the N-word in Morro Bay, and folks, including Women's March, contacted the City Council and said, please do something, please pass a resolution, please make a declaration, please do something so that people of color feel safe in Morro Bay and at least know that the council's listening. And under that council, nothing was done. They wouldn't talk about it. They said, you know, Morro Bay is a safe place where, you know, if we talk about it, it's just going to get worse. So by the time this came forward again from Race Matters SLO County, the council had changed. I had been using my voice more. People across the county were speaking up. And finally, the council, the Morro Bay Council, was one of two in the county to declare racism a public health crisis and to write a letter to our county to ask them to declare racism a public health crisis as well. And so things change. But to Andrea's point of it takes time. The first time that council told me no, I was very dejected. I was very upset, and I thought, you know, nobody in government listens to me. And it was one of the reasons that, you know, I thought, okay, then I need to be in one of those decision-making seats. So bringing that activist voice into the room made a difference for our city. And we wanted to hear from you, though. We have a little bit of time, and we'd love to read some more things out from the chat about what your why is, you've talked a little bit about your spark, but we'd love to be able to hear a little bit more. If there's any next steps you're thinking of taking. We've talked about just two of them, you know, me running for office, Women's March planning a town hall, Andrea campaigning for candidates that she believes in. Those are big steps that people take sometimes, but you heard Ashley earlier said that she interned for my campaign. But we'd love to hear, you know, a little bit more about what you're doing. And I've got the chat open here, so we'll give people just a minute to chime in about what your why is, and if you're thinking about any next steps. You're also welcome to ask a question. This is just our time to pause instead of talking at you to be able to talk with you. I see a lot of folks in the chat had put earlier about environmental concerns and about the presidential election. So I'm just watching for more stuff to pop up there in the chat. Let's see. My spark was from 2017 when I was one of the organizers of a march against gun violence at my college. And I want to say thank you for that. Women's March helped organize March for Our Lives here in San Luis Obispo. So thank you, Anne. And I hope if you're in this area, I hope you're connected with Moms Demand here in San Luis Obispo. There's a group, Moms Demand Action Against Gun Violence. There's an active group here in San Luis Obispo. Janine is talking about the polystyrene action this week. And Janine, if there's a link you could put in the chat, that would be very helpful so that everybody could see either an example of the comments they could make. There is a March 10th vote by the Board of Supervisors. It's a conservative board that is trying to pull back on this polystyrene ordinance. So Janine, if you can give us any links in the chat, that would be great. Someone else is saying they love empowering female energy. Thank you, Shayna. And City of SLO meetings to advocate pedestrian and cyclist safety. So that's huge, to attend your local city council meeting and speak up at public comment. And that's one of the tips that we have for you. I'm finding it hard to find job opportunities for gender equity activism that are outside of the typical elected official path. Curious to see if we have any tips. I do think it's hard to find those kinds of paying jobs here in San Luis Obispo County, but we can talk later about tips for getting into that. And we're going to move on now. So thank you for divulging what you have going on. We very much appreciate hearing from you. So tips and tools is what we have next. And the reason we chose this slide is because we have, through Women's March San Luis Obispo, 2 different series that we've done, Answering the Call and Ask Me Anything. And the ones that are featured here are tips about running for office, as well as tips for joining a campaign. And I know Miriam Shaw was out there in the audience, so thanks for being here, Miriam, Grover Beach City Council member. So we put together a handout for you about different ways that you can get involved in the political realm, different ways that you can bring your activism to the political realm. We also put together an activism toolkit that basically outlines some of the things that we did when planning and implementing, or planning and offering the Women's March. And then we'll talk about a little bit about events, which goes with the activism toolkit, making public comment. We have some tips for you. Getting on a board or commission. We can't emphasize enough how important this is to make your voice heard in your community through a board or commission. Of course, running for office, joining a campaign, and then leveraging social media. So because we have a little bit of time, I'm going to open up the handout here. One sec. I couldn't see it on my screen there, so I'm going in this way. So this is LinkedIn, and I will grab the link real quick and put it in the chat for you. It's a little handout that we put together so that you have some tips for getting more active in the political world. We put together our slideshow from when we last presented in 2018 at Change the Status Quo. Right here on how to start a movement. And I won't go through all of this. I just wanted to show you briefly that we have a whole agenda here. If you'd like to look through these slides on starting a movement, how to use messaging and social media, the importance of intersectionality, different tips for planning events, and some other tools that you can use. So if you'd like to look through that, it's there for you. We also linked in a WikiHow for those of you that are interested in making public comment, but maybe are a little bit afraid of speaking in public and or haven't really been to a meeting before. You can pull up this WikiHow, and we both read through it. It's high quality of how you can bring your voice to your elected officials. We have a SLO County handout about boards and commissions. So if you're interested in getting on a board or commission in SLO County, here's information for the county as well as each of the 7 cities. And then a new group, Women in the Pipeline, San Luis Obispo County, that's a nonprofit working on getting women involved. They hosted an event for helping women get involved on boards and commissions. So this is a video that you can watch. And I hosted one myself on Afternoons with Addis. So if you just want to see some folks talking about the boards and commissions. We also linked in for you, someone said they love, supporting women. There's a lot of resources out there for women who are running for office, as well as those who just want to join a campaign. And then at the bottom here is probably some of the most important information, which is about leveraging the media. Without the media, it's very hard to have a voice because you don't have an audience. So if you're thinking about getting your message out, then you'll really want to dig into this information about news and social media.
And I'm going to put the link in the comments so you can download it.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, there it is.
Yeah. And
So-
Andrea's going to jump in next talking to you about keeping the momentum, because one of the things we started with earlier was change doesn't always happen right away. So how do you keep the momentum?
And we have learned this year that you just never know what's going to happen and what to expect. Women's March San Luis Obispo in January of 2020 had the annual march with thousands of people in the streets. And the goal for 2020 was to get everybody to the voting booths. But what happened, right? In March, everything shut down due to the pandemic. For us as organizers, most of our events are large public events, whether it's a rally or a march, whether it's a town hall or educational panels. The gist of it is that we get lots of people together. And, you know, one purpose of that is to share the message and educate, and the other is just to create and soak up the energy, because there's really nothing like being at the same place with people who are excited about what it is that you're going to do, and who can see that, you know, you're not alone in that. You actually have people around in your community who are willing to join you in your efforts. And so we had to pivot just like everybody else, and we decided to start a series that Dawn was referring to. The first one was Answering the Call. At the time, we called it Answering the Call in the Time of COVID, and we invited speakers who were women in our community who really stepped up, who were on the front lines of the crisis. And it's just one of the examples of, if you hit the hurdle, you know, you need to collect yourself and rethink, but you don't give up. You're not just going to say, now it's over because it didn't work. What's really going to help you with that is having people around you on your team that believe in your mission. And I can say how important this is. It's so funny because the way that our group came together was really just by Facebook algorithm, right? Like, we wanted to organize a march and we found each other on Facebook. We did not know each other in person. It took a couple months before I even met Dawn in person. But somehow the magic worked, that we just have a group of people who have different skills and different approach, and we know when we need to uplift one another, and when one hits the wall, then the other one is there to pick it up. And it's really hard when you have few people. There is 7 of us right now, but you don't need 7 if you have a few people who you're working hard together with, to just decide one day that all of you are done. And if you get to that point, then maybe it is time to rethink what you're doing and, you know, what's the next step in your life and in your community. But Dawn, if you can go to the next slide. So I wanted to share this as an example of not giving up and of keeping the hope going and of sticking with what you believe in. These 2 pictures are from my home country, Czechoslovakia, that eventually split into Czech Republic and Slovak Republic. It's situated in the middle of Europe. And the man waving to the crowd on the picture is Václav Havel, who was a writer and an activist, and ended up being elected president. But I want you to just think about his life. He was born right before the World War II. And then after the World War II, in 1948, the communists seized power in my country. Czechoslovakia became a satellite state of the Soviet Union for a long time. 20 years later, in 1968, things started to look up. The country experienced a brief period of liberalization, with people pushing for free media, free speech, free travel. There was none of that available. We could not leave the country, only to go to specific places like Soviet Union. And so people started to push in for change, and it did not sit well with the Communist Party. So one night in August of 1968, Soviet tanks rolled in, and people woke up to this. You see the picture with the tank, that's what people woke up to in the morning. And so all of that progress for change was just rolled back immediately. And it took another 20 years. In 1989, students started demonstrations against the one-party government. It was mostly students and dissidents who got out in thousands and decided that they were done. And this time, and obviously this is simplified, but I'm just trying to give you an idea. And this time it worked, they were successful. Václav Havel, who was known as a rebel playwright and human rights activist and who spent multiple periods in prison, became the president. And what he said about hope is one of my favorite quotes. It is, hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. He believed that hope is a state of mind, not a state of the world. It's something you must find within yourself. It's not something that you can delegate to anyone else. And Don, if you want to go to the next one, just to continue along that line of thoughts, Cleo Wade said, you don't have to wait for anyone to tell you that you're in this, begin. And it kind of brings it back to the beginning, right? We sometimes doubt that we can make a difference in the world. We doubt that our voice matters. We don't know how to start. But really, if you have hope in your heart, if you're passionate about making this world a better place, there are so many ways in which you can get involved. And, I hope that you get some of the answers here. As we were talking, feel free to put any thoughts or questions in the chat as well.
And we wanted to give you just a moment. We are going to take about 60 seconds to just get started with your commitment, a one-sentence commitment to yourself. It can be in your own notes, but if you feel like you want to share it with the world, we would love to be able to see your commitment in the chat. I care about whatever your spark is, and therefore I will. And it could be any of the things that we mentioned. Therefore, I will attend public comment. Therefore, I will research how to start a movement. Therefore, I will look at a board or commission to join. Therefore, I will join a campaign and support somebody that I believe in running for office. Or therefore, I will run for office myself. So let's just take 60 seconds of, I know silence is awkward on a Zoom, but I'm gonna set my timer and watch the chat, and we would love to see what comes through there in the chat so that we can read that out.
And I just want to add, even if you don't feel comfortable sharing, although I really hope that we will see some ideas so that we can be inspired to continue the work. Make sure that you just write it down. Do it for yourself. It is something that will make it more real. If you're still deciding about what you want to do, it is something that once you start thinking about what it is that you want, you're one step closer to getting it done. And if you're more comfortable sharing with us, you can unmute yourself and let us know if typing is it's if you have more to say.
I see Ashley said, let me see if I can make this bigger. I care about making policy change for women and other marginalized groups. Therefore, I'm going to do more research into working for campaigns. And Shana said, I care about our climate. Therefore, I will actively pursue educating myself on ways individuals can change or can encourage policy action. Martha said, I care about immigrants in detention camps. Therefore, I will look for ways that I can help. I care about the inaffordability of education for all. that parents can't see their children as much because their lack of education affects their salaries. Therefore, I will learn more about public policy and strive to make positive change in their lives. Laura says, I care about racial justice. Therefore, I will speak up at every opportunity and will find organizations I can support and or join that address these issues. Lisa says, I care about making the world a more equitable and livable place for people to thrive. Therefore, I will educate myself and take actions toward making this happen in my community. And Kaylin is saying, I care about addressing issues of environmental inequality. Therefore, I will be more active in educating myself and working on getting into local government. Good job, Kaylin. I care about helping my community. This is from Lydia. Move beyond performative allyship. And therefore, I will learn how to make public comment and go to local policy meetings. Thank you for being brave, Lydia. Erica says, I care about equity and will contact my local elected officials to make local government accessible and will lobby my Congress member daily. One day I will run for office myself. Thank you, Erica, for being so brave. And Bill says, I care about immigrant rights, therefore involve myself in local groups devoted to this common goal. And so there's a couple more in there I'll read, and then we are going to move to Q&A. So Lorraine says, I care about 1 million undocumented here in the UK who won't access vaccines. I therefore campaign at Status Now for All. And the last one I'll read is from Hannah. I care about dismantling racism. Therefore, I will continue to unlearn, educate myself and others on oppressive systems. So all of you are taking such important action. And the one thing I will say is I love how much people are educating themselves, and that can go in tandem with speaking up. You can share things that you're learning with others. You can come to public comment and share things that you're learning or things that you want your local representatives to know about. So that's so important. I'm going to stop sharing. We have about 12 minutes. I think it would be easiest, Samantha, if people raised their hands and then you could ask them to unmute. If folks have questions, if you know how to raise your hand in the participant, because we have about 40 people here, just so that everyone gets a chance if they want. And if you've already had your comment read out, if you want to give somebody else a chance, but please do. I see Lisa is raising her hand. You're welcome to unmute, Lisa, and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear
and if
me?
you want to come on camera, yes. You're welcome to put your camera on if you want to.
Okay, let's see. I'm sort of on the move here, but I'm not actively driving. But I guess my question is, how do you kind of like follow up with public comment and like make sure that your comment isn't kind of just like going off into the void?
I think that, you know, what Andrea said is having a long-term strategy, making public comment, emailing your elected officials, asking them if they could have a coffee or do a phone call, coming back to public comment, getting other people to go to public comment as well to, you know, share your message. One thing that I would say as an elected official is not very effective is when people copy and paste and 100 people send the same message, but nobody shows up to the meeting. That one is not as effective as we would like it to be. I've done it myself, but I can tell you sitting on the other side of the dais now, when we get the same message from hundreds of people, but nobody bothers to come to the meeting, that one gets easily ignored. It's much more challenging to let a message go when there's a person behind that message and when that person is persistent. Who else has a question or a comment? Ashley, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering if you have any tips for looking for campaigns to apply to. I studied sociology and I'm studying public policy, so I kind of missed out on that part of the government and politics education. So I just looking for a little direction in that.
Yeah, there's a couple of Facebook groups. Run to Win is one of them. I believe it's either from Emily's List or from Emerge, and oftentimes people will post in there like, I'm a new candidate, or I would like to volunteer on a campaign. That is a great place to, find campaigns. Emily's List, sometimes if you're wanting to get paid to work on a campaign, Emily's List sometimes does events where people can share their resumes, and they're always looking for people that can staff campaigns. So that's a good one. And honestly, I would say if you like people who are in office, reaching out to them to see if they're going to run again and offering them help while they're in office. There's a lot to do when you're in office, and sometimes the support that comes in the campaign drops away once you've gotten elected. And so sometimes folks who are in office are really scrambling to find somebody who can help them. And so staying connected with people who are in office already. I know at the congressional level and possibly at the state legislative level, sometimes they'll have internships that they'll post, and you could apply for an internship, whether it's in a local office or at the office in Sacramento or DC.
Awesome, thank you.
And Andrea says, sometimes groups that are being advocated for, there's a question in the chat here. Sometimes groups that are being advocated for don't have the strongest voice. How do you ensure the message you share as an activist represents the group you are activating for? Do you want to take that one, Andrea?
Sure. It is a really good point, and I think that one of the very important things that you need to think about when you're advocating for anything is to make sure that people you're advocating for are involved. It's been an interesting experience because we often hear suggestions of how we should advocate for a certain group of people, and then we connect with the people and they might not be interested in us either taking up the cause or doing it the way that was suggested. So I'll just use a quick example of recently Planned Parenthood often has the protesters, anti-abortion protesters in front of their clinic, and on social media there is a call for, let's have an anti-protest, let's sit there across the street and support the women and the people who are seeking healthcare services. Well, we connected with the Planned Parenthood, and it turns out that is not their ideal solution to it. It typically just brings more attention to the people who are there with their anti-abortion protests, and then they ask, well, can you just share the message that people can donate to us, and here's a list of actions that people can take to help us. And so it is really important that you actually are connected with somebody that you are advocating for. It is important. I can give another example from one of my meetings with the congressman where the topic was immigration. It was about a local person who was taken by ICE, and the people advocating for undocumented immigrants wanted to meet with the congressman, and they reached out to us as Women's March because they knew that there is a connection now. They knew that we have worked on this issue before, and we can help them get to that table. And so that's what we did. It was me and the person who was involved, and their family members, and some other local advocates. And again, you get to connect them with your representative. You get to present your case. Don't expect they're always going to be. If you come to me, I'm going to be like, I'll do everything I can to help you out. If you're an elected official, then you also need to be truthful about what is it in your power to do and what it's not. But it is so important that they know your story, because that's how they connect with us. That's how they know what they're doing and who they are doing it for. They have that face connected to it. And so, yes, you absolutely have to make sure that you don't just walk into the room and say, oh, I'm here to advocate for undocumented immigrants, and this is how it should be. It's you bring the person with you, or if, you know, they can't or don't want to be there, you use their story to send forward.
And we have time for probably one more question. I'll just add on until I see a hand go up that one of the things we did through Women's Marches before we do any fundraiser for any group, we always ask that group, how would you feel if we did a fundraiser on your behalf to donate money to you? Some groups said, no, we don't want that. Most groups said, yes, please. You know, we'd love if you did a fundraiser for that. When working on immigration issues, we also would, you know, had tried to be very sensitive to the fact that some folks, especially if they're dealing with immigration issues, don't want to be in the public eye. And so being very careful about the kinds of stories that you share about people and divulging who they are. The last question that we'll take is from Lisa saying, could you speak a little more about what boards are? What are the qualifications you need and how you can, what you can accomplish, etc. Andrea, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, because you're going through an application process. And we just did this on afternoons with Addis, talking about the qualifications. I'll just say the qualifications real quick that all the panelists said were a spirit of inquiry, a passion for whatever you're working on, and a willingness to put in the time were the biggest qualifications. But can you talk about the application process? And
so I can tell you just personally, and this will be different. You need to check with the city and county and see what the application process is, what the qualifications are. But I have just applied to a commission on the status of women in San Luis Obispo County. It was really an easy process as far as the application goes. They do not let you type a lot. I was actually surprised by they really just want a sentence or two for why you're applying, which made it really stressful because I can talk for days. And also you feel like, well, I'm not really giving you my entire biography here, which is exactly why they do it that way. But you know, look at what you're interested in. I do want to quickly mention, because we talked with Don about this, people often feel that, you know, I care about women's rights, therefore I'm going to go to this commission on the status of women. Your voice matters on every board. If it's Don, you know, more boards as an example, but it doesn't matter which board in your community it is. Your voice as a woman, as a person of color, as an LGBTQ person, as a disabled person, you're bringing that position, that view to the table. So just think about
Sam,
the broad perspective. Like, you can actually make a change on a board that you wouldn't think about as a natural fit from the beginning.
The last comment I'll make, and I'm going to turn it over to Sam, is, you know, you think about your planning commission. They approve projects in your community. If you're a woman, if you're a person of color, you may feel different in the physical space of your community than another person, a cisgender, you know, white male might feel. And you may bring a different perspective to the kinds of buildings and the location of different buildings that should go up in your community. So that's just one brief example, but I know we have to close. So Sam, I'll let you close it out for us.
Yeah,
thank you so much to everyone for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, just to add on, thank you again, Dawn and Andrea, for coming and sharing all those tools and just the encouragement. And thank you to all you attendees who took time out of your Saturday to come in here and engage and ask questions. It's super cool to see. I also threw in a link in the chat for our workshop surveys. It just helps give feedback to the presenters and as well as Center for Service and Action. And it also enters you into the giveaway at the end of the conference, each one you do for a workshop. But that is everything. Hope to see you at our closing. It's going to be really exciting. But yeah, That is the end of this workshop.
Andrea, thank you so much. It was great to work with you again, as always.
I'm so excited to see you. That is so great. Yes, we do conference as well.
Yeah, I will see you shortly. I'm sure we'll have to start planning Writers Conference soon.
Right. Oh.
All right, I have to go hop over to the prep for the closing, but I can switch one of you to the host so it doesn't close out if anybody had any last little comments they wanted to talk to you guys about. That works?
Sure.
Yeah, that's fine. And then Samantha, do we see the results of the survey or how does that work?
We will work on that after all the conference. Once we get everything and kind of get that organized, we'll reach out.
Thank you so much for your help today.
Yeah, of course. This was so cool to see and be a part of. All right, there you are.
And I actually have to jump off pretty quick here too, Andrea. I know you had other things you had to get to.
Yeah, it's